Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, let's unpack this fascinating stack of sources we have here today, because we are moving, far beyond the flashcards, the textbook grammar drills, all that stuff.
Right.
If you've reached that level where you feel functionally fluent, but you know there's another mountain to climb, that C1, C2 plateau, then you are ready for what we're talking about today. The real engine room of advanced language mastery.
Indeed. We're shifting the focus entirely. The technical mechanics, the vocabulary, the syntax, those are necessary tools, of course. But they're no longer the central challenge.
I'm not the bottleneck anymore.
Exactly. This deep dive is centered squarely on the psychology of staying in the game when, frankly, the novelty has vanished. The single most crucial factor for advanced learners, as all our research confirms, is not talent. It is the sustained effort we call motivation. But, and this is the key, we need to radically redefine what that word actually means.
Our mission today is to address that arduous phase of language learning, that phase where you know enough to sound competent, but not enough to feel truly effortless. It's that period where progress feels heavy, and sometimes it feels like you're actually getting worse. So we're dissecting how to cultivate stamina, resilience, and, critically, how to maintain forward momentum when every ounce of your intellectual energy feels scarce.
And what's fascinating here, and I think really validating for listeners, is that the sources confirm this is a universal experience for highly committed learners. It's not just you.
Right.
You've successfully navigated the intermediate challenges. You hit that C1 or C2 threshold, which is often, functional fluency.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the rewards stop coming so quickly. Progress feels frustratingly stagnant.
Or even reversible.
Or even reversible, yes. Especially after a complex conversation where you felt like you stumbled.
And this leads us directly to the core insight from this deep dive. If you are at this advanced stage and you're wondering why you aren't flying through the material anymore, remember this: persistence is actually more valuable than sheer talent.
Oh, absolutely. Raw intelligence or, a natural knack for mimicking sounds can absolutely get you to a B2 or intermediate level very quickly. You can master surface grammar and conversational phrases.
But that's where the talent often plateaus, isn't it?
It's the wall. Talent is excellent at accumulating facts like vocabulary items, conjugation tables. Persistence, however, is the tool required for handling the nuance, the emotional management, and the sheer volume of exposure needed for true C2 mastery.
So it's a different skill set.
A completely different skill set. That shift from simply knowing the rules to internalizing them so deeply that they become unconscious, that's not a burst of talent. That is thousands of repeated interactions built on grit.
So we're going deep into the mindset shifts you need to navigate that psychological valley where most advanced learners stall. And ultimately, the ability to manage your own mental state, your self-talk, and your expectations becomes the most powerful linguistic tool you possess.
So let's start by setting the record straight about that feeling of being overwhelmed. This lands us right in section 1, navigating the nonlinear path and cognitive fatigue. If you are listening to this and you feel tired or mentally slow when you study, you need to understand something.
What's that?
That this is entirely normal. And counterintuitively, it is often a sign of success.
Okay, I appreciate that reframing, but let me challenge it just a little bit. It sounds like motivational speech.
Yeah.
When I sit down to read something dense and my processing speed is clearly slower than it was 6 months ago, my internal self-talk just screams that I'm failing. How do we trust that feeling of sluggishness isn't a sign we should just quit for the day?
That's the critical distinction. If we connect this to the bigger picture of cognitive science, we see that learning a language, especially at the advanced stages where you're dealing with ambiguity, cultural register, subtle nuance, is fundamentally a nonlinear process.
Right, not a straight line up.
Not at all. The beginner phase feels linear. Every hour of study yields visible, quantifiable progress, new words, completed chapters. But the advanced phase is about reorganization, not just accumulation.
So what does nonlinear mean in a practical sense, day to day?
It means your progress doesn't correlate directly with the hours you put in. You can put in 10 hours this week and feel like you gained absolutely nothing, only to have a massive cognitive leap 3 weeks later while you're doing something totally unrelated, like watching a movie.
So the work is happening in the background.
The brain is working in the background. Cognitive fatigue, that sluggish feeling, is entirely normal because you are asking your brain to sustain constant executive control over an incredibly complex system. You are forging new neural pathways, and that process is profoundly energy intensive.
I love that idea. Fatigue isn't failure, it's the feeling of construction. It's activity.
It's the brain doing heavy lifting.
When we talk about mastery at this level, we aren't talking about memorizing a list of 100 verbs. We are talking about a fundamental physical rewiring, a deep assimilation process that the brain just needs time to finalize. This requires a significant investment of time to achieve those core goals that move beyond just simple communication.
Exactly. The brain requires time to assimilate the subtle sounds, especially the phones that don't exist in your native language, so that processing becomes automatic. It needs to internalize the complex syntax and structures so deeply that you can deploy, say, subjunctive clauses without even thinking about it.
It's just there when you need it.
Most importantly, it requires time to physically forge those new, thick neural pathways that enable effortless, automatic, and nuanced use. This is literally building new highways in your mind.
And that forging process is intensely taxing. I mean, when you're an advanced learner, you're not just mapping a foreign word to a native word anymore. You are dealing with subtle shades of meaning, the difference between eager, keen, and enthusiastic, for example. You're learning idiomatic usage, and you're constantly calculating the correct social register for a given situation.
You might understand the literal meaning of a complex phrase, but internalizing its cultural weight, when exactly to deploy it in a business meeting versus a casual chat, that's the heavy, energy-draining cognitive lift.
Okay.
That's why you feel totally drained after a complex negotiation or reading a dense technical paper. It's not just language effort. It's social, cultural, and cognitive calculation all happening simultaneously.
And this massive investment leads directly to the daily reality described in the sources. This oscillation of effort. Some days you sit down and the process is invigorating. Everything clicks.
Yeah.
You sound fluent, you feel smart, your comprehension is crystal clear, you feel like a genius.
And then the very next day, maybe you're a little sleep deprived or just cognitively full from other life demands, and you sit down and it feels exactly like wading through molasses.
I know that feeling.
Every word requires conscious, laborious effort. The complex syntax slips away and you feel, genuinely, like you've regressed 2 months. The crucial point here is that this oscillation is not a defect in your learning. It is an intrinsic, unavoidable part of the journey toward C2 mastery. It's your neurological system recovering and consolidating.
So what does this all mean for practical goal setting then, especially on those sluggish days? The traditional advice, for other areas of life is often to just push harder to maximize your output, but the sources seem to suggest a much gentler and ultimately more effective approach, one that respects the brain's need to consolidate.
On those productive high-velocity days, by all means, relish your fluency. Push for deep comprehension, tackle the most challenging material you can find.
Go for it.
But on those sluggish molasses-like days, the goal dramatically shifts. And this is where advanced learners often fail themselves. The goal shifts simply to maintenance.
Maintenance. That sounds dangerously close to being lazy, doesn't it? If the goal is mastery, why should I allow myself a maintenance day?
Because maintenance is not quitting. It's damage control. And it's a powerful strategy for longevity. It removes the paralyzing pressure of constantly having to accelerate.
Okay.
Maintenance means doing just enough to hold the line, to keep the neural pathways active, and to prevent backsliding without inducing burnout. It's ensuring that the linguistic system remains online, even if it's running in low power mode.
So why is doing 5 minutes of listening better than just quitting entirely for the day? What's the real difference?
It's the re-entry cost.
The re-entry cost.
If you quit for 3 days because you felt overwhelmed, the cost of ramping back up on the 4th day is enormous. You waste mental energy fighting procrastination and trying to recover lost footing.
Right, you have to get over that hump again.
But if you commit just 5 minutes to passive listening, or review just one piece of learned material, say reviewing flashcards for a specific idiom, you've won the day. Even if that 5 minutes felt awful, you minimize the re-entry cost to 0.
That brings us to that core economic principle of learning that applies so beautifully here. The compounding effect of marginal gains. The goal isn't immediate flawless velocity, it's consistency.
Yes.
Showing up on a maintenance day, even for 10 painful minutes, adds to your cumulative total and, more importantly, prevents the necessity of painfully relearning material later, which is where true demotivation really sets in.
Think about the difference over time. If you miss a week entirely, you spend the next week not progressing, but just recovering your former level.
You're just getting back to where you were.
Exactly. But if you consistently show up, even poorly, for 5 minutes a day, you are always building. Even if the progress is invisible to you in the short term, The brain recognizes that pattern of continuous exposure and it prioritizes that information.
And to bring this powerful idea of perspective home, the sources use this analogy of scaling a mountain. I think we need to deepen this metaphor because it's a fantastic tool for managing that advanced learner anxiety.
It really is.
The ascent is demanding. You're often struggling with internal fatigue, self-doubt, the sheer length of the journey. And there are moments when abandonment is deeply, deeply tempting.
If you imagine the language journey as a physical mountain, base camp is where you learn the essentials, basic vocabulary, simple greetings. The intermediate phases, the lower slopes, where the forest is dense, but the path is pretty clear.
Grammar rules are systematic. Every 10 steps of walking yields visible height gain. That's your linear progress.
Precisely. But the C1, C2 plateau is the exposed, high-altitude ridge. The path isn't clear anymore. It's difficult. The air is thin. The terrain is tricky. You're no longer learning new major systems. You're refining your balance on the subtle rocks register switching, idiomatic nuance, cultural density.
And you can walk for hours and the summit looks exactly the same distance away. That's the non-linear feeling translated into physical terrain.
And here's the critical action the metaphor suggests. When you feel stalled or tempted to abandon, you must pause and look back. Look at the elevation you've gained. That elevation is the massive functional vocabulary you've acquired, the intricate grammar structures you now deploy unconsciously, and the subtle cultural cues you now comprehend without effort. When you realize you are no longer operating at the level of a beginner, you realize you are no longer at the base of the mountain.
That perspective shift is the psychological antidote to the plateau feeling. You're not stagnant. You are simply working on the most refined, highest altitude parts of the climb. It's harder work precisely because you are far more capable than when you started.
You're grappling with complexity, which is a sign of your advanced status.
This raises a really important question, though. If motivation, that initial burst of excitement that got you started, isn't a reliable energy source for the long climb, how do we cultivate the internal discipline needed to maintain that marginal gain consistency, especially when the mountain air is thin?
That's the perfect segue.
Which brings us into Section 2. Practical strategies for cultivating internal discipline. We have to challenge this idea of motivation as some mystical lightning strike force that makes everything easy. That version of motivation is fragile and it's temporary.
Motivation, as we're defining it in the context of sustained advanced learning, is quiet internal discipline. It is the ability to exert executive control when your emotional self is throwing a tantrum and saying, "I'm done."
It's that whisper.
It's that whisper that says, just one more minute or read just one more complex paragraph, even when you are mentally drained and the comfort of distraction is calling your name.
Okay, so let's unpack strategy A from the sources. Micro habits trump grand strategies. This is a vital technique for combating the decision fatigue that often sinks advanced learners.
Yes. Decision fatigue. It's the cognitive drain you experience simply from having to decide what to study, when, and for how long. It's often that pre-study negotiation with yourself that kills the session before it even starts.
The battle before the battle.
Exactly. The goal here is to lower the barrier to entry so low that resistance cannot form. You bypass that executive function debate entirely. If you try to commit to an hour of intense grammar review, your brain, recognizing the massive energy expenditure required, may trigger a huge internal alarm, which leads to immediate procrastination.
So we need to make the entry gate so small that the brain just says, oh, that's trivial, we can manage that.
Precisely. We need to define micro habits, tiny non-negotiable commitments. Instead of that intense hour, commit to 5 minutes of passive listening while you are making your morning coffee. Don't listen to learn. Just listen to maintain exposure.
Or, instead of reading a whole academic paper, commit to reading a single paragraph of a news article every day during lunch.
And the genius of this approach isn't the learning achieved in those 5 minutes. It's the consistency ritual. That single paragraph or 5 minutes of listening acts as a low-cost, high-frequency reminder to your brain that this language system is active and required.
It keeps the pilot light on.
A perfect way to put it. The core principle here is that consistency trumps intensity. 5 minutes every single day is infinitely more powerful for long-term neural consolidation than one sporadic 5-hour session every 2 weeks. The repeated, small exposure reinforces those neural pathways we discussed earlier. It ensures the system never fully shuts down.
Okay, so that addresses how we study, but what about the energy source behind the habit? If that 5-minute micro habit is still painful, what fuel keeps us showing up? And that brings us to strategy B, which is essential when the sheer complexity of advanced material becomes discouraging. Reconnecting with the intrinsic why.
The underlying reason for learning. This is the necessary non-finite fuel for resilience when the grammar is dense, or a particularly tricky high-frequency idiom just will not stick. The why must be deeply personal to survive this plateau phase.
If your only motivation is external validation like getting a better grade on a standardized test or pleasing a parent, that fuel source is finite. It's easily depleted the moment the test is over or the immediate pressure is gone. The intrinsic why, the desire for a fundamental change in your intellectual life, that's what sustains you through the long slog.
And our sources provide some powerful examples of what that intrinsic why looks like at an advanced level. It's no longer about just simple conversation. Perhaps it's professional mobility, not just getting a job, but joining the global policy debate in your specific technical field.
Or maybe it's the sheer profound joy of navigating the globe with complete intellectual autonomy, reading complex legal documents or nuanced literature without relying on a translation.
And crucially, perhaps it's the sheer intellectual satisfaction of mastering a complex system. It's a form of deep cognitive engagement. It's the feeling of making your mind bigger. And that satisfaction is always available, regardless of your external circumstances.
So when you feel yourself slipping into frustration, you have to actively call upon that why. You need to pause the frustration over the confusing phrasal verb and remind yourself.
You have to say, I am persisting through this difficult rule, not because I enjoy this particular grammatical complexity, but because I am building the vehicle that will allow me to integrate into that global intellectual community. That link provides purpose to the temporary pain.
And strategy C, which might be the most crucial for C1, C2 learners, brings us back to something very human, embracing self-compassion. At the advanced level, our linguistic ear has become incredibly sophisticated. We are fantastic at noticing our own errors and inconsistencies, and we become our own harshest critics. We set these impossible native speaker standards for ourselves.
We internalize a toxic narrative. I'm not progressing fast enough, or I am making the same error I made last month, so I must be fundamentally incapable.
That's a killer.
The self-compassionate strategy requires fundamentally reframing that narrative. Instead of focusing on the gap between your current performance and the native ideal, focus on the fact of your continuous effort.
This sounds soft, but it's actually an act of mental resilience, isn't it? We're encouraging you, the listener, to move away from comparing yourself to this vast end goal, and instead just compare yourself to the person you were yesterday.
The new persistent statement should be, I am engaged in a cognitively complex task which is inherently slow, difficult, and frustrating, and despite all of that difficulty, I am showing up and I am persisting.
It's not lowering the bar.
No, it's not lowering the bar for achievement. It's recognizing the reality of the immense cognitive work you were doing. It's acknowledging the difficulty of the mountain you are climbing.
And that subtle shift transforms a perceived failure into a confirmation of diligence. It acknowledges that when you struggle with register or nuance, you are not lazy or unskilled. You're performing one of the most demanding intellectual feats humans can undertake.
You're rewiring the foundational system of thought and communication while simultaneously integrating complex cultural layers. That recognition of the high cognitive cost is essential fuel for the long haul.
Okay, let's unpack how we keep the internal reward system ticking. Because the lack of constant visible progress at the advanced level can be profoundly demotivating. This leads us directly into Section 3, the role of error and celebrating micro-victories.
This is all about dopamine regulation. When you were a beginner, every new word felt like a huge reward, a massive hit of dopamine, confirming success.
Right.
At the C1, C2 level, those big, obvious wins are much rarer, so you must consciously identify the small, often fleeting ones to keep your brain engaged and rewarded for the subtle work it's doing.
If the brain isn't getting rewarded, it stops prioritizing the task.
Yeah.
So what does a micro-victory look like when you're already highly skilled? It can't just be a pat on the back. It needs to be tangible.
They need to be specific. For example, did you successfully follow the complex plot and cultural references in a foreign language podcast without pausing or rewinding? That is a victory of sustained comprehension.
Okay, that's a good one.
Or did you manage to use a new, difficult phrasal verb or an idiomatic expression correctly and naturally in a conversation? And crucially, did you use it without having to translate or premeditate it first?
Ah, so it just came out.
It just came out. That is a victory of active production and assimilation.
And these moments aren't just feel-good breaks. They are measurable indicators that your dense passive comprehension, all the reading and listening you've done, is successfully becoming integrated into active automatic production.
Which, again, is the ultimate metric of mastery. They confirm that all that exhausting internal work is actually paying off in real-time application.
But we have to make sure that the pursuit of these micro-victories doesn't run into the single greatest psychological barrier to fluency, which is the fear of error.
Yeah.
For so many advanced learners, the desire to communicate perfectly overrides the desire to communicate at all.
That is the core of the C1 stall. Learners are competent enough to know exactly how far away they are from perfection, and so they stop speaking to avoid revealing that gap.
It's paralyzing.
This is a critical psychological distinction. The sources state this clearly and emphatically. Perfectionism is the enemy of fluency. The pursuit of zero errors leads directly to hesitation, self-censorship, and ultimately stifled wooden communication.
If you prioritize the pristine quality of the output, you are missing the entire point of language, which is connection and information transfer.
Which raises an important point about how we view mistakes. We need to completely reframe errors as positive feedback mechanisms, as data, nothing more.
A mistake is not a moral failure. It's not a sign that you are bad at language.
Not at all. It is the brain's way of testing a hypothesis about a rule and getting immediate, useful information back from the real world.
The sources use the analogy of learning a physical skill, like learning to throw a ball accurately.
It's perfect. When a child learns to throw, their first attempts are wildly inaccurate. Their body has tested a hypothesis about the necessary muscle force and timing, and the feedback, the ball going wide, immediately calibrates the system. Stumbling while walking is how the brain learns balance.
So in language, the dynamic is identical. You attempt a complex structure. Maybe you mix up a preposition, or you use the wrong tense. It produces confusion or gets corrected by a listener, and your brain immediately receives calibration data saying, hypothesis failed. Adjust system parameters.
So the more mistakes you make, the more high-quality, real-time data your brain receives, provided you are paying attention to the feedback. If you are afraid to speak because you might make an error, you are withholding the necessary, vital calibration data from your own cognitive engine.
You're trying to learn a skill while refusing to practice the skill.
Exactly.
Therefore, the goal must always be communication, not immaculate performance. We have to encourage intelligent boldness, the willingness to try a complex grammatical structure even if you are only, say, 70% sure it's right.
You need to be willing to leap into conversation and prioritize the transfer of meaning over the flawless execution of grammar. And this emphasis on acceptance is reinforced by just observing native speakers.
That's a great point.
The research points out that even those of us who have spoken the language since birth, we stumble, we backtrack, we use filler words, we rephrase sentences constantly, or correct ourselves in real-time speech.
All the time.
We don't notice it because the listener instinctively filters out the noise and focuses on the meaning. Advanced learners must grant themselves that same professional grace.
If the person you are talking to understands your intended meaning, you have functionally succeeded. The subtle grammatical error is secondary to that functional success. By focusing entirely on preventing errors, you miss the opportunity to engage fully, which is where the real data-rich learning actually happens.
Think about the difference in brain states. When you are hyper-focused on avoiding error, your brain is in a state of high anxiety and restriction. It's actively censoring.
Right.
When you focus on meaning and communication, your brain is in a state of flow and production, which is exponentially better for solidifying those neural pathways.
Okay, let's pivot now to Section 4, which deals with another major anxiety point for advanced learners. How do you measure progress when it stops being obvious? If I'm not learning 50 new words a week, how do I know I'm not sliding backward?
This is the crux of the advanced plateau problem. At the C1 or C2 level, progress is often elusive because it is no longer about accumulation or passing standardized tests. It is about refinement. It's about depth, nuance, and automaticity.
And refinement is almost impossible to quantify day to day. It means your vocabulary is becoming more lexically dense. You're choosing the perfect word, not just a good word. Your register switching is becoming smoother. You know instinctively when to use formal versus informal language. These are subtle shifts, not big, shiny milestones. We need better tools for visibility.
Tool number 1, which is highly effective and based on the reflective practices in the source material, is the linguistic journal. And this is not just a glorified vocabulary list.
No.
This journal is specifically designed to document your thoughts on the language itself. It is a ledger of your cognitive breakthroughs.
Let's be very specific about what should go into that journal to make it valuable for an advanced learner. It's not enough to write new word.
Yeah.
Elusive.
No. You should document a specific moment where you realized the subtle contextual difference between two near synonyms, like elusive versus evasive.
Ah, okay. The nuance.
Or document the moment where you finally understood a complex cultural joke or a nuanced political allusion because of a piece of background knowledge you just acquired. You record the aha moments, the subtle cognitive shifts and breakthroughs that are otherwise forgotten the next day, which makes all your hard work feel wasted.
The journal transforms into a physical, undeniable record of your intellectual achievement. So when you feel discouraged, you can flip back 6 months and realize that you were struggling with a specific grammatical structure then that is now deployed effortlessly.
It makes the invisible progress instantly visible and concrete.
What's tool number 2?
Tool number 2 is auditory documentation. We encourage recording yourself speaking, not just reading, but engaging in extemporaneous speech, maybe describing your day or debating a topic.
Because we're often deaf to our own day-to-day improvements, aren't we? We hear ourselves constantly, so we can only perceive the mistakes. But audio provides objective, external comparison.
That objective comparison between a recording from 6 months ago and one from today can be astonishing. You might unconsciously realize a significant reduction in hesitation markers. Fewer fewer long pauses, less searching for the right word.
And this is key. You might hear a dramatic improvement in intonation, rhythm, and stress patterns that makes you sound far more natural and less mechanical, even if you still make the occasional grammatical error.
Yes, the rhythm of speech is often the last, most stubborn component to master, and hearing that improvement confirms deep, unconscious assimilation.
That reduction in hesitation is particularly crucial because it shows your brain is accessing the necessary structures faster. It indicates that those neural pathways we talked about in the first section are firming up. They're moving from conscious, laborious retrieval to automatic, effortless production.
And you can't feel that shift in real time, but the recording captures the hard, measurable data.
Okay, and what about recognizing progress when we're not actively measuring it?
And finally, yes, we must dedicate time to recognizing passive gains, which are the silent milestones of advanced learning. These are the moments when profound progress happens without any fanfare, often outside of dedicated study time, simply because of cumulative exposure.
And what's fascinating here is that the sources identify one of the most profound psychological victories, stopping the internal habit of translating everything in your head. For years, learners live in this bilingual operating system, constantly mediating. The moment you start to think directly in the target language, that is a profound passive gain. It means you've built a self-contained linguistic system, independent of your native tongue.
Another beautiful example, often cited, is the consumption of media. You're watching a challenging film or listening to a lecture, and you realize you have been entirely engrossed in the content for 20 minutes and you didn't even notice.
And the subtitles have just been there. You haven't needed them.
The cognitive friction of interpretation has completely disappeared. You caught every complex cultural allusion instantly, without effort. That ease of comprehension is massive progress that often goes entirely unnoticed precisely because it no longer requires effort.
So the journey to mastery is paved with these silent victories, and the ability to manage your emotional response to the perceived plateau by using journals, audio recording, recognizing these passive games. That's what separates the C1 learner who eventually reaches C2 from the one who stalls out entirely because of self-doubt.
And if we connect this back to the why, these tools help reinforce the why by showing you tangibly that your intrinsic desire for confidence and mastery is continuously being fulfilled, even on days when you feel stuck or unproductive.
Okay, for our final section, let's zoom out completely. We've talked about the internal mindset, the cognitive struggle, the daily habits required. Now let's discuss the macro payoff for this tenacity, why all this effort is worth the psychological investment, particularly in the modern world.
The first, undeniable truth is the global significance of the language itself. English is, for now, the global lingua franca. It serves as the primary language of commerce, scientific publishing, international air traffic control, diplomacy, and, arguably most importantly, digital culture and high-level academic discourse.
So mastering this tool isn't just about ordering food or navigating a tourist district, it's acquiring a universal access pass to knowledge and influence. Our research confirms that C2 mastery grants you access to a global conversation. It connects you to over 1.5 billion people worldwide who use it as a common bridge.
That 1.5 billion figure is staggering, and it underscores the fact that the utility of English extends far beyond just native English-speaking countries. It is the default operating system in nearly every major international endeavor, particularly in highly technical or high-stakes fields.
Let's detail that a bit. B1 or B2 fluency might allow you to travel, but C2 mastery is what allows you to collaborate on a cutting-edge scientific paper with researchers in Seoul and Berlin.
Or negotiate a complex, multi-jurisdictional contract with partners in Dubai and Singapore. The precision required for high-stakes fields demands the level of nuance you are fighting for right now.
And this directly unlocks professional and cultural doors across incredibly diverse geographical regions. This persistence you're investing now is a key that unlocks access. The sources specifically cite examples from countries like Brazil, where English fluency exponentially increases your career trajectory in multinational corporations.
Japan, where it is absolutely vital for tech and research, and throughout Europe and Southeast Asia for diplomacy and finance.
And crucially, this mastery allows for the consumption of media, literature, and news from diverse primary sources. If you only consume news filtered through your local media or translation services, your perspective is inherently limited. It's potentially biased, and it's delayed.
Right. Mastering the global lingua franca allows you to access primary sources and diverse perspectives instantaneously, giving you a truly comprehensive, three-dimensional view of global events and culture.
Furthermore, we have to acknowledge that sticking with this process, the long, grinding work of refinement, is a form of future-proofing your career.
I like that phrasing.
In a rapidly changing, integrated global economy, the ability to collaborate internationally and integrate complex knowledge from diverse linguistic sources is the most invaluable, non-displaceable skill set.
It is a skill set that will retain its value regardless of technological shifts or localized economic downturns.
And finally, it's worth repeating that stepping out of one's linguistic comfort zone to achieve this near-native level of mastery takes genuine courage. It is an act of profound intellectual ambition, and it requires vulnerability, the very vulnerability we discussed when we talked about embracing errors and speaking boldly.
The macro payoff isn't just monetary or professional. It is the fundamental broadening of horizons and the deepening of personal confidence. The person who reaches C2 is fundamentally different from the person who started, simply because they have proven the capacity for sustained, long-term intellectual commitment and profound resilience in the face of this nonlinear difficulty.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to offer genuine applause for your tenacity, seriously. If you are listening to a conversation this detailed about the psychology of advanced learning, it means you have already paid the price of admission. You are far down the path to mastery. You are engaging with the highest level of linguistic complexity.
And whether your progress feels rapid and exhilarating, or frustratingly incremental, or even discouragingly gradual, the most important element, the core message of this entire deep dive, is that you are still here.
Yeah.
You are still showing up. And that consistent presence is the ultimate predictor of success.
So let's end with a provocative final thought for you to carry into your next micro-habit session. Instead of focusing on the momentary difficulty of the grammar rule you might miss tomorrow, think about what specific, tangible, high-level goal your current persistence is actively building toward. Is it leading the international team? Is it publishing that research paper? Is it living abroad with complete cultural and linguistic freedom?
Identify that future victory. Define it clearly in your mind. Then visualize the precise moment you achieve it. How will you celebrate that achievement? Use the anticipation of that celebration, that feeling of final, hard-won victory, as your fuel for persistence on those days when you feel like you're wading through molasses.
Whiskey, show it up.
The view from the summit is worth the climb. Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
So if you've been with us, you'll know we've spent a good amount of time recently really laying down the psychological scaffolding, the framework you need for, advanced linguistic success. We looked at resilience, the whole internal game,
Right.
and the necessity of viewing motivation not as this kind of fleeting inspiration, but as a dedicated, almost, a cold-blooded discipline.
A discipline, exactly. We've really established the why. The foundational beliefs you have to have just to stay on the path.
Yeah.
But as any advanced learner knows, reaching that C1 and especially that C2 threshold, it brings its own unique set of problems.
A whole new set of challenges.
Absolutely. And, motivation alone it just can't solve them. You hit this point where the very strategies that got you here, the flashcards, the grammar drills,
things that worked so well before,
they just stop yielding visible returns. So today we're pivoting. We're moving from the abstract, the psychological, to the intensely practical, the tangible mechanisms of progress.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when we talk about language acquisition in those early stages, a victory is so clear, isn't it?
Oh, it's incredibly clear. It's quantifiable. It's immediate.
Did you learn that verb conjugation?
Yes or no? Do you know the difference between singular and plural? A simple yes or no.
Exactly.
It feels like you're climbing a staircase and every single step is clearly marked. You know exactly how far you've come.
And that certainty, it completely disappears at this advanced stage.
Yeah.
It just vanishes.
Right.
At the C2 level, progress stops being binary, and it becomes deeply, and I mean sometimes maddeningly, nuanced.
So it's not about just counting words anymore.
No, you're no longer focused on your raw vocabulary count.
Yeah.
The mastery, it shifts to these subtleties that are incredibly difficult to measure or even to document. We're talking about the difference between just knowing a word and truly mastering its connotation across, multiple different contexts.
To give us an example of that, what's a C2 learner really struggling with that, say a B2 learner isn't even thinking about yet? Well, a B2 learner is mastering syntax, sentence structure. The C2 learner is mastering register. Knowing precisely when to pivot from, say, a highly formal presentation style to informal, nuanced, maybe even ironic banter in a social setting. They need to master tone, which signals attitude, often without any explicit vocabulary.
So it's what's between the words.
It's what's between the words. And critically, they need to grasp cultural implication, understanding the hidden meaning, the shared history that's embedded within a certain phrase that maybe only a native speaker would catch. I mean, these are very high-level cognitive skills.
And traditional ways of measuring progress just don't capture that.
They fail completely.
So that's the mission today. This deep dive is really designed to give you, as that advanced learner, the concrete tools to quantify that incredibly nuanced progress. We need to deconstruct how you move past that feeling of stagnation, how to document improvement that's happening deep beneath the surface, and I think this is the big one, how to fundamentally alter your relationship with your own errors, with your own failures.
Yeah.
Because that feeling of being stuck, this anxiety about making a mistake when the stakes feel so high, that is often the most treacherous terrain for a high-level learner. And we're here to map that terrain with some practical, measurable strategies. We have to start with the central frustration, the one that drives so many advanced learners to the absolute edge of quitting.
Right.
It's that sensation of just being stuck, the emotional drain we call the plateau of latent potential.
And that's such a great name for it because that's exactly what it feels like.
It's that agonizing phase where you're working incredibly hard. Maybe you're attending classes, reading dense novels, engaging in complex discussions, but you are seeing zero external immediate leaps forward. Your skill level just feels completely fixed.
And that frustration is it's entirely predictable once you understand the underlying mechanism of any complex skill acquisition.
So it's not a personal failure.
Not at all. It's not a failure of effort. It's a misunderstanding of timing. Whether you're learning a language, mastering, a musical instrument, or training for high-level athletics, progress follows what we call an S-curve.
An S-curve.
A moment you recognize this curve, that plateau becomes manageable because you finally know what you're looking at.
Okay, so the S-curve.
Yeah.
Let's chart that out for the listener. Let's focus on the psychological and, I guess, the emotional experience of each phase of that curve.
Certainly. So if you visualize a graph, right, you're plotting your cumulative effort against your measurable results.
Got it.
The first phase, that's the lower part of the S. It's a steep incline. The early gains are they're so rapid. You learn the alphabet, basic syntax, a few hundred high-frequency words.
And every hour you study feels like a major victory.
Exactly. The satisfaction is immediate, motivation is sky high, and you're just surrounded by these visible daily progress markers. That's the honeymoon phase.
And it's the most rewarding phase, right?
Correct.
Which is why it hooks so many people in the first place.
That's it. Then you move into the intermediate phase. The S-curve, it starts to flatten out a little bit, but the gains are still steady.
Right.
You're building complexity. You're mastering tenses, subordinate clauses. You can hold a conversation, even if it's a bit clumsy. You know you're improving, even though the rate of return is slowing down.
So far, so good. Steady progress, steady motivation. No major crisis yet.
Not yet, but then you hit the upper curve. the advanced stage. And the line on the graph becomes nearly horizontal.
That's the plateau?
That is the plateau of latent potential. Your effort remains high, maybe you're even intensifying it, but the advanced gains are often invisible.
So they're happening, but you can't see them.
Exactly. They accumulate deep beneath the surface in your neural connections, in faster retrieval times, and pattern recognition, until suddenly, and it feels like it's out of nowhere, they crystallize into a noticeable leap forward.
And what does that crystallization look like? What does it feel like?
It might be the moment you realize you just finished an entire novel without mentally translating. Or you delivered a really complex, nuanced argument in a meeting without stammering once.
So the energy is still generating growth, but the growth is structural, not superficial. It's happening in the foundation, like a massive aquifer filling up way down deep beneath the desert floor. You don't see the water, but the pressure is building.
Precisely. That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And just understanding this curve is the first most crucial step in managing your expectations. You have to trust that the invisibility of progress is not the absence of progress.
Right.
Most learners quit right before that breakthrough because they mistake the silence of the growth for stagnation. They think their sustained effort has become ineffective.
And it takes a different kind of tenacity, a different kind of faith, really, to persist when your only metric is faith in the process itself.
It really does.
And that leads us right into the major psychological barrier that prevents people from enduring that plateau. And that's recency bias.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the growth is invisible, our brain defaults to measuring our success based on what just happened 5 minutes ago.
Recency bias.
Yeah.
It is the silent saboteur of the advanced learner. It truly is. We have this powerful, innate tendency to judge our entire accumulated skill set based solely on the last instance of performance.
And for the high-level learner, that last instance is usually something really challenging. A high-pressure conversation or a difficult text.
It's the classic scenario. You spend a week reading a complex economic policy paper, and you're understanding 95% of this dense vocabulary. You feel fantastic.
On top of the world.
Right. Then you try to explain a simple concept in the target language to a child, and you stumble over the most basic irregular verb, and suddenly that momentary lapse triggers this self-judgment of utter incompetence.
And the inner monologue just kicks in.
Oh, it's crippling. I've been studying for 5 years, and I can't even remember the past tense of to run.
And that single immediate mistake, the error you made right now, it just blocks out the entire memory of the complex high-level thinking you achieved just yesterday.
It does. And the cure for this is simple, but it requires absolute discipline. You must deliberately force yourself to look backward to gauge your real progress. You have to refuse to judge your total capability based on today's single mistake.
So it requires a strategic intervention into your own cognition then. You are actively choosing to ignore the immediate feeling of failure in favor of documented historical reality.
And that reality is often the subtle evolution of your errors. When you look back, you realize that the mistakes you're making today, maybe misplacing a highly nuanced modifier or mixing up two synonyms with slightly different connotations, are far more complex than the foundational errors you were making 6 months ago. The very nature of your error has evolved, which is itself profound progress.
So that structural shift in the quality of your mistakes, that validates the effort during the plateau. And this retrospective view, it helps us define the ultimate goal of advanced learning, which is the transition from, conscious competence?
To unconscious competence, yeah. And this realization about automaticity is the key. It's the key to validating your progress during that long, invisible phase. Think back to the intermediate stage, the B1, B2 level.
Right.
Every sentence you spoke or wrote was a conscious construction project. You were taxing your working memory. Do I use the subjunctive here? Is this noun masculine or feminine? Which preposition follows this specific phrasal verb? That process requires a massive conscious cognitive load.
It's like you're running a mental checklist of every single grammatical rule before you can even utter a full sentence. It's mentally exhausting, which is why intermediate learners often feel so drained after a long conversation.
It's exactly that feeling. You're constantly translating in your head, actively searching for the rules, running diagnostic checks on yourself.
Yeah.
Unconscious competence, or automaticity, means that demanding construction process has moved out of your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for conscious thought and demanding calculations, and into the smoother, more automatic regions.
So what once required all that focused mental effort, searching for that obscure, irregular past tense, now happens instantaneously.
Instantaneously. So the real metric of success during the plateau isn't what new material you learned, but how much less effort it took you to construct the same complex sentence today versus 6 months ago.
That reduction in cognitive friction, that's the true measurable advancement during this phase.
And this automaticity is non-negotiable if you intend to access truly complex content. Think about it. If 80% of your brain power is still dedicated to parsing grammatical mechanics,
You only have 20% left for the actual ideas.
exactly. You only have 20% left to grasp the complex philosophy, the scientific concepts, or the political theory you're reading about. The entire goal of the plateau is to flip that ratio, to make the language processing so efficient that you can dedicate maximum cognitive bandwidth to the ideas being communicated.
So we understand the psychological reality of the plateau. We get it. And we recognize that our progress is now measured in reduced cognitive load, not just in, words learned.
Right.
So now let's get tangible. Let's move from that psychological understanding to the practical physical strategies for actually documenting this nuanced progress. This is for the C2 audience. Simple diary entries or vocabulary lists, they're just completely insufficient. We need an immediate upgrade to our documentation strategy.
The documentation needs to mirror the complexity of the material you're consuming. The core shift is from recording vocabulary to analyzing language use. And that upgrade is what we call metacognitive journaling. It's the process of using writing to analyze how the language was consumed, which forces this deep processing of the language in the language itself.
Let's break down the mechanics of this, because that's a pretty substantial shift from just, Dear Diary. A listener trying this for the first time needs a clear blueprint.
Okay, so a high-quality entry must actively engage with and dissect linguistic nuance. Let's imagine you're reading an article about international relations, and you encounter a sentence describing a nation's response.
Okay.
The author uses the word retort and then later rejoinder. A typical beginner's journal would just define both words. A metacognitive journal demands a debate. You write an entry in the target language that debates the connotation.
So what's the subtle flavor difference between retort and rejoinder that a C2 learner has to capture?
Well, retort implies a quick, sharp, and often defensive or critical response. It carries a sense of intellectual aggression or an immediate counter-argument.
Okay, sharp. Got it.
Rejoinder, on the other hand, it's a much more formal term. It implies a reasoned, often official, and careful reply to an accusation or statement. So, by writing, say, 150 words analyzing, why did the author choose the sharpness of retort when describing the diplomat's unexpected remark, but the formality of rejoinder when describing the official statement published the next day? You're forcing deep processing.
That is fantastic. You're not just a student anymore. You're a linguistic analyst.
Yeah.
You're transforming passive observation of synonyms into active high-level analysis of semantic fields and register.
Yes.
And it forces you to analyze English through the lens of English, bypassing that dangerous translation mechanism in your head.
And that bypasses everything. It's the whole point. This approach integrates those words into your active vocabulary with the correct register and nuance already attached.
Right.
Rote memorization of a list of synonyms might help you recognize those words, but only deep contextual analysis will allow you to actually use them correctly in the heat of a complex conversation or in a demanding piece of writing.
Okay, so that really addresses the written component. But advanced fluency is so often defined by the spoken word. We mentioned voice recording, but for C2, it's not enough to just check for grammar. The core focus has to shift, and shift intensely, toward prosody.
Prosody is arguably the final, most distinguishing frontier for the advanced speaker. It really is. It's the rhythm, the stress, and the intonation. Basically, the musicality of the sentence.
The music of the language.
Exactly. You can have impeccable grammar and perfect vocabulary, but if your prosody is flat, the effect is uncanny. You sound robotic or unnatural, or you just failed to convey the intended emotional depth of what you're saying.
And this is what often trips up advanced learners from certain language backgrounds, right? Their individual sounds are perfect, but their overall delivery sounds foreign because the rhythm and the stress are being applied according to the rules of their native tongue.
Precisely. The goal is compelling delivery, and that requires emotional range. So when you're recording yourself, you have to move beyond checking for misplaced prepositions. You need to analyze your acoustic delivery for emotional modulation.
Okay, so what does that mean in practice?
For instance, are you using pitch effectively? A native speaker uses a slight, almost imperceptible rise in pitch to indicate sarcasm or mild disbelief, even when the words themselves are totally affirmative.
And the power of the pause. That's something I think native speakers use so intuitively that advanced learners often shy away from, maybe because they're anxious about holding the floor for too long.
Absolutely. Pauses are essential punctuation in spoken language. The listener needs to analyze. Am I using pauses for dramatic effect or to signal a significant transition in my thought?
Or are you just rushing?
Or am I just rushing through difficult phrases, trying to hide the moment of internal translation? The exercise is to compare your recording to a native speaker's, not just for pronunciation, but for the overall musicality and flow. If you say, "I am deeply concerned," are you deliberately elongating and stressing deeply to really convey the gravity?
That detailed analysis of your acoustic delivery, the pitch, the rhythm, the calculated silence, that is the critical difference between being merely intelligible, meaning a listener can decode your words,
Right.
and being truly compelling. And a compelling speaker is one who can persuade, tell sophisticated stories, and really manage the psychological impact of their words on their audience.
And that compelling delivery unlocks the highest level professional and academic opportunities. Your ideas can be brilliant, but if the delivery lacks conviction and that musicality, the impact is severely diminished.
And both of these techniques, the metacognitive journaling and the prosody analysis, they provide the raw data you need for the psychological strategy we outlined earlier, retrospective analysis. This is the practical antidote to that crippling recency bias.
It is the ultimate proof of growth. It's undeniable. If you are diligent with your documentation, both the nuanced written debate and the emotional acoustic recordings, 6 months later, you have irrefutable evidence. You can look at a journal passage you wrote, debating connotation, and instantly spot clumsy, overly cautious phrasing that you would now intuitively refine.
You'd realize, oh, I would never use that construction today. It's way too passive.
Exactly. It is that moment where the subconscious progress finally crystallizes into conscious validation. You see the evidence that the invisible gains during the plateau were real and that automaticity has occurred. And this transforms that subjective, draining feeling of stagnation into a data-driven, quantifiable achievement.
We just really cannot stress this enough. You are often the most unreliable judge of your own daily progress.
Completely unreliable.
So the externalized documentation, the dated journal entries and the acoustic recordings, they act as a necessary time capsule. They provide objective evidence that the S-curve is still trending upwards even if it feels flat day to day.
Yeah.
You have to create your own evidence of success at this level. So we've now mapped the terrain of invisible progress. Let's move to the psychological operation that most often leads to self-sabotage.
Oh, yeah.
Which is perfectionism as a paralysis mechanism. At the beginner level, the learner has this freedom of having nothing to lose, right?
Right.
But at the advanced level, having invested so much time and effort, the stakes feel, well, almost existential.
They do. And the fear is deeply rooted in the imposter syndrome of the non-native speaker. Having worked for years to achieve this high degree of proficiency, there's this intense anxiety that one simple public mistake will result in a snap judgment.
That they'll be marked as, what, intellectually inferior or incompetent?
Exactly. That it will just negate all their past achievements. And this anxiety, it leads directly to linguistic timidity.
And timidity leads to silence, which, as we've already established, is the ultimate enemy of progress. But the difficulty here is reconciling the theory with reality.
Okay.
I agree completely on the psychological necessity of accepting error, but many high-level learners report that their academic institutions or their employers do hold them to a near-native standard. They often explicitly judge minor errors harshly. So how do we square the theory of acceptance with that intense external pressure?
That is a fundamental and a necessary challenge to the theory. We have to acknowledge that the external world, the HR department, the university admissions committee, often operates with these very binary metrics.
Right.
But our goal here is to give you, the learner, the internal framework to endure those moments of judgment without shutting down the core engine of acquisition. The only way to survive that external pressure is to re-engineer your internal definition of what a mistake even is.
So we have to challenge the very notion of mistakes by introducing this fundamental linguistic concept of interlanguage. Why is this concept so empowering for someone who's facing that kind of high-stakes external pressure?
Interlanguage is, it's revolutionary because it fundamentally reframes the learner's output. Your current version of the target language is not broken or defective English.
Okay.
It is a dynamic, evolving system. a complete functional linguistic bridge that's unique to you as an individual, and it's situated temporarily between your native tongue and your eventual target language mastery.
So it's a system under construction, not a flawed final product.
That's it. It makes the system active rather than passive. It's not a failure. It's a snapshot of a highly complex personalized system that is actively, constantly changing. And here is the core insight. Mistakes are almost never random failures. They are typically a hypothesis. Your brain is constantly acting like a rapid-fire scientist. It processes incoming linguistic data from reading, from listening. It develops internal rules based on the patterns it observes, and then it actively tests those rules through the output of speaking and writing.
Can you walk us through a more advanced hypothesis test? The Gabode example is classic for beginners, but what does an advanced learner's hypothesis test look like?
Let's take something more subtle, like phrasal verbs or prepositions, which are notoriously difficult because they often defy logical rules.
Right.
Okay, so a learner encounters the phrase, "I am accountable for the project." They hypothesize that for promal is the correct preposition following accountable because they've seen it used repeatedly in a causative sense.
Makes sense.
Now they encounter a new context and they say, "I am accountable to the board of directors." A native speaker corrects them. Yes, you are accountable to the person or group you report to, and you're accountable for the thing you manage.
So the mistake wasn't a failure of memory at all. It was the brain applying its existing logical rule set, accountable uses for, to a new situation. And the resulting correction provides the essential data point to bifurcate that rule.
To split the rule exactly. Accountable uses to, for people, for things. Errors are vital data points that are necessary for refining the system. The interlanguage needs to know where its rules break down.
Right.
If the learner, terrified of the external judgment you mentioned, is too afraid to speak or write openly, they deny their brain that essential corrective data. They deny the opportunity for the hypothesis to be tested and refined.
This means that silence is not just a psychological retreat. It is actively biologically detrimental to the acquisition process. By avoiding error, you are guaranteeing that your rule system remains rigid and incomplete.
It is exponentially more detrimental than any single public mistake.
Yeah.
100%.
Wow.
The system stagnates without both input and, crucially, without output. We often focus so heavily on the input, the reading and listening, but output is the brain's mechanism for self-correction and refinement. The only way to evolve the interlanguage out of its current state is to use it actively, testing its boundaries.
And we also need to offer some perspective on the definition of perfection by grounding it in reality. The goal isn't to sound like a printed dictionary, right? The goal is flow and adaptability and effective communication.
That's vital context. I mean, fluency is not about strict, rigid adherence to a textbook code. Native speakers constantly break rules.
All the time.
They use fragmented sentences, they mumble, they invent words, they interrupt themselves. If you transcribe most high-speed, casual conversations, the grammar is often a complete disaster, yet they are perfectly fluent.
So the advanced learner is striving for a level of grammatical purity that native speakers themselves only adhere to in highly formal written contexts, and just realizing that should significantly lower the internal pressure to be perfect in daily conversation.
It absolutely should. The key metrics should be communication effectiveness, contextual appropriateness, and flow, not grammatical purity. You must engage in this necessary exchange of short-term social courage for exponential long-term returns.
Okay.
You have to be willing to sound foolish in the short term, to risk that momentary misunderstanding or correction, to become truly articulate, adaptable, and compelling in the long term.
It's the ultimate linguistic investment strategy. You invest your social courage now, testing the hypothesis, for exponential returns in fluency and automaticity later. The mistake is the currency of progress at this level. Okay, let's pivot from the mindset of error to the practical mechanism of content consumption. We've established that the advanced learner must shift their focus entirely. They can't spend their time on basic review materials.
No.
At the C2 level, the content must integrate the language directly into their intellectual identity and their worldview. It has to be challenging and deeply, deeply engaging.
The phrase learning materials needs to be retired at this stage. It just does. We are now talking about life materials, content that you would consume regardless of the language because it deals with subjects that are intellectually stimulating or professionally necessary for you.
Right.
At this stage, you should be consuming content that actively challenges your existing worldview.
That makes perfect sense. The engagement level has to be so high that the language barrier itself becomes secondary. You should be using English to wrestle with concepts you already find difficult or engaging in your native language.
Precisely. We advocate for aggressive content consumption. I mean, reading complex opinion editorials and highly respected publications that deal with nuanced political, social, or economic discourse publications like The Economist, The New York Times, or specialized academic journals.
Or podcasts.
Or listening to long-form podcasts on genuinely dense subjects. Philosophy, cognitive neuroscience, astrophysics, or deep history.
Why is this leap in subject matter complexity so critical for linguistic acquisition, and not just for general intellectual stimulation? What is the core neurological mechanism we're trying to trigger here?
It is the neurological mechanism of the flow state.
Flow?
This is a term the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi coined, describing that mental state where you are so immersed in an activity that nothing else seems to matter.
Right.
In the context of language, flow is achieved when the subject matter, the quantum mechanics, the political theory, is so inherently challenging yet manageable that the learner momentarily forgets they are listening to or reading a foreign language.
So the cognitive task is difficult enough to demand your full attention, but not so difficult that it causes frustration and you shut down. It's that sweet spot.
Exactly. For C2 learners, that sweet spot usually involves material where you can comprehend roughly 90-95% of the content. If you understand less, you shut down from frustration. If you understand 100%, the material isn't engaging enough to demand the focus required for flow. That 5 to 10% of unknown vocabulary provides the perfect level of intellectual friction to maintain deep attention.
That's the key metric, isn't it?
Yeah.
When the language itself just disappears into the background and all that matters is the concept. The language becomes the vehicle, not the destination.
Absolutely. You are no longer consciously studying English when you're listening to a 4-hour debate about the ethics of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
You are learning about AI ethics through English. The emotional and intellectual stakes of the subject matter completely overshadow the mechanical effort required to process the language itself.
Your focus is externalized.
It's completely externalized onto the subject matter.
So what are the neurological benefits of that deep contextual engagement compared to studying, say, a static list of 50 new words?
This deep contextual learning creates exponentially stronger neural associations compared to simple rote memorization. It's not even close. When you encounter a word like vicissitudes while reading a historian's analysis of the shifting power dynamics in a developing region, that word is instantly tied not just to the definition of a change in circumstances,
Right.
but to the complex, emotionally relevant concept of political volatility and historical struggle.
So the word isn't sitting in a sterile, isolated list. It's embedded in the three-dimensional context of political struggle, historical scholarship, and the author's specific tone. The context itself acts as a massive memory hook.
It provides multiple retrieval paths. If you forget the direct definition, you can retrieve the word via the historical concept or the emotional state it describes. Acquisition thrives when the focus is genuinely on the message, the subject matter, the content, the what, rather than the linguistic form, the how.
Yeah.
By making the content engaging enough to induce flow, the language mechanics become secondary, allowing for passive, powerful, and efficient integration into your interlanguage system. This is where fluency starts to feel genuinely effortless and organic.
So we have the strategies for internal progress, the documentation, the reframed error. Now let's wrap up by looking at the macro perspective. The ultimate payoff.
Okay.
We need to quantify the benefits and the global opportunity cost of achieving this advanced fluency. That initial promise that the language opens doors needs to be defined in C2 terms, beyond just job opportunities.
It's essential to define the global stakes because the sheer effort required for the C2 level demands massive motivation. I mean, we are living in a fundamentally hyper-connected world, and the language you're mastering has taken a very specific position in the global infrastructure.
And that position, whether we like it or not, is the lingua franca.
It is. English has become the universal operating system of the digital, academic, and hyper-connected economy. And this isn't a judgment on cultural superiority, but a recognition of its established dominance in specific, high-leverage global sectors.
Okay, let's detail those high-leverage sectors. Where is this proficiency not just useful, but an absolute prerequisite for leading the field?
Well, think about the 4 pillars of modern global activity. First, the internet and technology. The vast majority of historical and newly generated digital content, programming code, high-level online discourse.
From Reddit philosophy discussions to open-source software documentation.
It's all in English. Second, science and academia. Most major peer-reviewed research across physics, medicine, and engineering is published in English, even if the authors are based in Germany or Japan. Without C2 fluency, you are waiting for a translator to access cutting-edge knowledge.
You're always a step behind.
Always. Third, aviation and maritime communication. Standardized air traffic control and maritime communication protocols rely entirely on clear English proficiency for global safety and logistics. It's a matter of life and death.
Right.
And fourth, international diplomacy and finance. While the UN uses multiple official languages, the vast majority of day-to-day international business, finance contracts, and collaborative diplomacy happens in English. Mastering this language is mastering the operating system of the global flow of high-value information.
That is a staggering frame for the endeavor. And that mastery, in turn, grants this profound benefit we call cognitive liberty.
Cognitive liberty is the ultimate agency. By achieving C2 mastery, you effectively remove geographic, political, and cultural restrictions on information access.
So you're no longer reliant on summaries, secondhand sources, or the filters applied by local media or translators in your region.
Exactly. You get to define your own reality based on direct, unmediated access to the source material.
That grants tremendous personal agency because you're no longer limited by your physical location.
Yeah.
You can navigate the world and its information entirely on your own terms.
It does. It grants immediate, direct access to the collective knowledge of the world. Consider the tangible difference. If you are an architect in Lisbon and you want to understand the latest innovations in sustainable design from Seoul, you don't have to wait for a translated summary in a trade magazine. You can go straight to the original research papers, read the architect's personal blog, and engage directly with the online commentary from peers in London and São Paulo.
It's the difference between reading a press release about an event and reading the original internal memos about that event. The nuanced understanding, the author's exact tone, the specific technical terms, they're all immediately available to you for your own critical analysis.
And that immediate engagement is vital. It means you are participating in the global conversation in real time, not lagging behind. When a new scientific breakthrough or a global crisis emerges, your advanced fluency provides an immediate access point and the agency to formulate your own informed opinion by triangulating multiple original sources simultaneously.
And if the global and professional opportunity isn't motivating enough, the final piece of the puzzle is the profound biological advantage this endeavor provides, enhanced cognitive reserve.
This is the long-term structural benefit that affects your physical health. The complex, sustained act of juggling two linguistic systems, your native tongue and your advanced target language, is a profound mental workout that measurably improves your executive function.
Okay, so let's detail the how here. How does multilingualism strengthen executive function, which encompasses things like attention control, task switching, and problem solving?
The primary mechanism is called inhibition control. Every single time you speak, your bilingual brain must actively suppress the rules, the vocabulary, and the phonetic systems of the language you are not speaking.
Wow.
It has to focus its resources entirely on the target language while maintaining a readiness to switch back. This constant task switching and inhibition control acts like resistance training for the executive control centers of the brain. It makes those control centers faster, more efficient, and more resilient.
So simply by trying to use English while actively suppressing the urge to use your native language, you are physically strengthening your brain's ability to focus and manage conflicting inputs.
Exactly. And studies have repeatedly demonstrated that bilingualism provides a measurable, significant boost to these high-level functions, even beyond the linguistic realm. You become generally better at filtering out irrelevant information and prioritizing complex tasks.
And the most significant finding associated with building cognitive reserve is its link to delayed neurological decline later in life.
It is perhaps the most compelling long-term reward. Bilingualism has been scientifically linked to delaying the onset of age-related cognitive issues, including dementia. We are talking about delaying the manifestation of clinical symptoms by several years, often 5 or more, sometimes as much as a decade.
That's incredible.
When you engage in the complex language work we've outlined today, the metacognitive analysis, the complex consumption and flow state, you are literally constructing a stronger, more resilient brain structure for the duration of your life.
So the summarization of the motivation is simple then. When the pressure of the plateau feels insurmountable, when the nuance of grammar feels too exhausting to even think about. Remember the stakes. You are not just memorizing lists for a test. You are constructing a global identity, granting yourself cognitive liberty over the world's information, and fundamentally building a demonstrably more resilient and healthier brain for the rest of your life. That is an investment that pays dividends until your final breath.
And that macro perspective is so essential because the path from advanced to mastery requires a different kind of endurance. It's less of a sprint where these bursts of effort yield immediate returns.
Right.
And it's far more of an ultramarathon. It requires not speed, but consistent tenacity and a profound trust in those invisible gains we discussed in Section 1.
And that ultramarathon requires a specific kind of internal courage and external documentation, which manifests in 3 core actionable principles that have to define your practice moving forward.
First, you must embrace the plateau. Trust the S-curve. Know that the work you are doing today, even if the results are invisible, is accumulating into future automaticity. The silent work is the most valuable work.
Second, you have to relentlessly celebrate the subtle nuances. Document them through that metacognitive journaling and rigorous prosody analysis. You have to create the evidence to validate the growth that recency bias is trying to deny you.
And finally, you must forgive your errors. View them as essential logical hypotheses for testing and refining your dynamic interlanguage system. Without the error, the system simply cannot evolve.
It requires the humility to accept that you will sound foolish or clumsy in the short term, coupled with the absolute audacity to speak up even when you are unsure, just to provide your brain the data it needs to refine itself and ultimately achieve mastery.
You have already demonstrated the rare tenacity required to get this far, to reach this C-level proficiency. Do not let the internal paralysis of perfectionism or any external pressure stop you now. Keep engaging with the world's most complex ideas, keep documenting the nuance, and most importantly, just keep speaking.
It is truly exceptional work that you're doing. Thank you for diving deep with us today. Now, for the final thought, something for you to mull over as you continue this journey of global mastery and cognitive expansion. You now have access to the collective knowledge of the world and the ability to critically synthesize original information from anywhere on the planet. What specific area of science, philosophy, or original cutting-edge research previously locked behind a language barrier will you now explore using this expanded cognitive liberty? Go find that original source and dive in, using language not as a subject, but as a window onto the world.